Hi everyone, my name's Jeffery and welcome to XD Coffee Chats. We're back with our final episode of the series here in Newcastle, where we're talking all things accessibility. So just a quick reminder about XD Coffee Chats for anyone new joining us today. So it's a platform where we get to meet people from across our design team here at Sage. So that's from UX, research, content, solution design and accessibility. It enables people to share their stories to colleagues across Sage and also people in our external design communities too. And in today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Martin Underhill and Hannah Cox from our accessibility team. So hi Martin, thanks for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin Underhill. I'm an accessibility specialist here at Sage. I've been with the company about 4 years now. I was Sage's first accessibility hire, so I've been plugging away, fighting the fight for 4 years, and we've seen some real progress over that time.
And welcome, Hannah. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm Sage's most recent accessibility hire. I'm a graduate here, so on a full-time program, but learning as much as I can about accessibility. And feel very lucky to be able to work with Martin and the rest of the team. And I feel like I'm having a good time learning and getting on with it.
Nice. So let's start with what is digital accessibility? I don't know if he wants to start with that question.
Oof, it's a big one, I guess. Yeah, digital is what we focus on. So we kind of focus on, I guess, two broad mediums or media. One of them being the web. That's the biggest one. But we also deal with native mobile, so native Android and iOS apps. Android apps for iPhones and iPads, that kind of thing. But yeah, the web is the biggest of those two areas. So we make sure that the code that developers write, the designs that designers put together, is all accessible. Making sure things are tested properly or tested in a way that we know will kind of give us an indication of whether this stuff's going to work for somebody with a disability of some kind. But also we get involved with on that kind of project level, making sure that people understand or helping people understand project priorities, how to arrange their workflow and send tickets to developers and designers to work on, that kind of thing.
And what types of accessibility requirements do we focus on when we're building products?
Oh, it could be any. There's such a broad range of blockers that are often put in people's paths. But we look at things from could be from a neurodiversity point of view. It could be from a more kind of physical impairment perspective, whether that could be to do with sight, hearing, or maybe motor. So we'll think about things from a kind of to make sure that interfaces can be kind of zoomed in, scaled up, for people with low vision, or it could be if someone had no vision and they used a screen reader, to make sure that things were programmed in a way that they could access the information the same way that anybody else might visually. Could be making sure that things are keyboard accessible, so that if you had a motor impairment, which meant you couldn't use a mouse, you could still access content. So yeah, lots and lots of different, and we're learning all the time, as well as the other part. The kind of the exciting part of the job is that you kind of realize that some of the work you're doing benefits some other kind of group of people. But yeah, it's an interesting job, and there's a lot that we cover.
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit more. I guess one thing that comes up is accessible design and inclusive design. Could you just kind of describe the differences there and where those two interlink?
So from my point of view, and Martin might have another point of view, but I see kind of inclusive design as being taking lots and lots of different people from very, very different walks of life, as diverse as possible, into account when you're designing a product or an experience, etc. And that can include people with access needs, people with disabilities. Whereas accessible design specifically focuses on making sure that people with access needs and people with disabilities are able to use products. So they kind of do align with each other. It's just that inclusive design is more specific to diversity as a whole, in my opinion, whereas accessibility obviously focuses on the needs of people with specific access needs. So it's just like slightly different. They can include each other. And it's always good to make sure that, again, if you're doing accessible design, you do get a diverse range of needs and a diverse range of opinions and take lots of different things into account. But again, the inclusivity line can be people from lots of different walks of life and not necessarily just accessibility.
Yeah. And you've touched on your role as being accessibility specialist. How does that role differ from other kind of engineering and design roles?
We think about accessibility all day, every day, where, I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would, right? It's that kind of, yeah, we everybody should and would, if they could, but, you know, product priorities, everything's very busy. So we're there as a kind of as an anchor to make sure that people don't run away with themselves and forget, you know, oh, we're gonna have to deliver this thing. We've got 3 weeks to do it. You know, we need to kind of all hands on deck. And oftentimes, the thing that is kind of thought about afterwards, or even sometimes you find that until people understand accessibility and why we're doing things in that way, that sometimes accessibility is deliberately put to one side and added on at the end, which can cause all sorts of problems. But yeah, that's kind of where we are with that.
I think we sometimes get a broader overview than necessarily like a designer or an engineer might get. So we're quite good at giving advice to designers and engineers and kind of bridging gaps sometimes, because we've got the technical knowledge, but we've also got the design knowledge. So even if it's not from an accessibility point of view necessarily all the time, we can kind of help bridge the gap between designers and engineers and developers to kind of see what's possible, but also think about user outcomes from lots of different angles, including accessibility. Or that's kind of how I've been working recently anyway.
That could even work between not just disciplines within the same project, but between teams. We have a lot of involvement with with lots of teams. I mean, Sage is a huge company. Sage has got lots and lots of products. They don't always talk to one another. They don't always know what they're each are working on. So we get that kind of helicopter view of everybody, what everybody's doing, so we can hook people up, create little task forces where need be. Just get kind of grease the wheels, if you like, and sometimes we will have a lot of involvement with the design system within Sage, so we can kind of make improvements there. Well, not us directly, but kind of by that one step removed, kind of making things at Sage better more broadly, just because we do get that kind of overview.
So I guess accessibility roles in design teams are still quite uncommon in the industry. And designers can almost have to kind of advocate and champion accessibility alongside the role. So it's great to be that Sage of set up accessibility specialists there. What was your journey into accessibility now? How did you kind of end up in an accessibility focused role?
For me, it was I was a freelance front-end developer for a lot of years. Did a little bit of work for small businesses, for kind of with kind of agencies and that kind of thing, contracts here and there. So I always found myself on I think it's since been called the front of the front end. So a front end developer who specializes in the user interface itself, rather than a lot of front end developers now are more on the back of the front end. So they talk about APIs and all that complex stuff, talking to servers and things. Where for me, it was always about the UI, about the user interface and the stuff that the users would use, which also led to design caring about kind of simplicity, ease of use, and those two things kind of came together. And I started working in the UK government for a while, where as an interaction designer, you need to know a lot of both of those things. There's a lot of overlap, lots of prototyping and code, which is really interesting. So yeah, kind of I led me down that route. And then when the opportunity to to be a bona fide 100% specialist at Sage came up, I kind of grabbed it. It was quite exciting, even though there was a lot of work to do. But that was kind of my route in through skills. And I guess the other part of it is kind of fighting for people who might not otherwise be included or have a kind of a say or be able to access something. So it's like kind of making sure that doing right by the people who are overlooked by designers and developers, and making sure that they're considered and integral to everything that people do. So I kind of that part of it appeals to me too.
And Hannah, I know you mentioned you came through on the grad scheme. Did you have an idea that you'd work in an accessibility focused role, or was it just design role? How did that pan out?
So yeah, again, because I've come in on the graduate scheme, I'm quite lucky to have a junior role in accessibility, which junior roles in general in accessibility aren't super common. Like accessibility roles aren't super common anyway, but junior roles are even more uncommon. But I was quite passionate about technology. I was doing a design course at university. And as part of my course, I was lucky enough to do a year out in industry. And in that time, I worked for a tech company, which I really, really enjoyed. But there was a lot there where I kind of realized that, there's a lot of problems where user testing doesn't necessarily take a lot of disability and diversity into account. So when I came back into my final year of university, I ended up focusing my major project on inclusive design and emerging technology, which I really, really enjoyed. And I was able to interview users as part of that, people with varying disabilities. And I just really, really enjoyed being able to look from the inclusive design sort of route, which my area was kind of inclusive design and accessibility. So I came out of my degree having really, really enjoyed that. And when I was applying for jobs, it was things like trying to make sure I could get inclusive design within the job that I wanted to work for. And then I saw the role at Sage come up, which was a graduate accessibility specialist. And I just thought that ticked so many boxes, especially with being on a graduate scheme, being able to train on the job, kind of being a designer from like physical product was my degree. But I was able to transition into digital product, which I already kind of had a bit of a passion for. But like getting specifically into accessibility within digital product was like a dream job for me. So yeah, I feel like I've landed on my feet with that one.
Yeah, I know a lot of designers actually are trying to enter the market who are quite passionate about accessibility. So it'd be good for more roles to become available. I think, do you see accessibility roles becoming more standard in design teams as design matures more?
I think from my point of view, kind of being newer to the accessibility community in my role anyway, is that a lot of people kind of are involved in champions networks or champion accessibility as part of their role within design teams. People are passionate about it, and then people are getting more passionate and taking it more on board as part of their role as, say, UX designer or a developer. There's a lot of developers and designers out there who've taken on like accessibility responsibility within their companies and within their jobs. And as a result of that, they're either now starting to look to transition into accessibility roles or have been able to make themselves an accessibility role, which is really interesting to see. And it's quite nice to see that there's lots of different routes into kind of accessibility, and people can use their specialisms as a designer or a developer and their background kind of to help them with that.
Yeah, I guess it's like empowering those individuals who
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
passionate
I think
about
it's
it.
brilliant.
Yeah.
We've done it. We've managed to. Most of our champions have got a certain percentage of the time signed off
Oh, nice.
to dedicate to accessibility specifically. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's that kind of like, of course it would be great if every team could have an accessibility specialist. So we are kind of spread so thin that champions network really helps. It's it's a big deal in terms of coverage and getting people outside of that network engaged as well.
Yeah. So let's delve a little bit more into kind of the type of things you get up to as a team. So I guess, what does the day-to-day look like for an accessibility specialist? Kind of what do you enjoy about the role? Any challenges? What kind of stuff do you get up to day to day? Or can it look very different from week to week?
I feel like it's different every single day that I come into work. Because we work across so many different products and teams, there's always someone who would like some help with something, or always someone who's got a question to ask. And they can be really, really varied questions as well. So it can be like you end up spending an hour having a think about something, doing lots of research. to come back and answer someone, whilst also doing all kind of my day-to-day work as well, which I really, really enjoy. I quite enjoy how different my job can look every single day that I come in. But in general, it's like a lot of design advice at the moment, working on projects from the very, very beginning of like design, discovery, research, things like that, all the way up until delivery, making sure that anything we release now is as accessible as it can be. And then kind of the other side is things like auditing and giving people reports, seeing how accessible their product is and giving suggestions of how they can fix it. And then also kind of something we're trying to focus a little bit more, or I'm trying to focus a little bit more on this year, is sort of community outreach and kind of getting more people involved within accessibility, making sure that everyone's kind of got the tools to deliver the things that they need to, with support from ourselves, obviously, but making sure that they don't always have to come to us and they can kind of build accessible practice into their role, so that we can kind of mature as kind of an organization within accessibility.
Yeah, my side of things, I kind of, as time's gone by, I've worked less on the kind of nitty gritty of the audits, of the kind of direct advice, and been more involved in things at a more project level. So we're kind of really making a push to, we Sage have a commitment to accessibility. We're kind of entering the kind of final straits of that, and kind of just working with project managers so that they don't feel under any real undue pressure. They know they're supported, all that kind of stuff. Interestingly, the past 6 to 8 weeks, Hannah and I, and some of the other team, the other accessibility team members, we've been on the road. We've been so not doing our day-to-day stuff at all, or trying to kind of keep on top of all that. Yeah, but we were down in Manchester last week. A couple of weeks before that, we were over at the Barcelona office and the Sant Cugat office, which is a town just north of Barcelona. Prior to that, we were in London. We've been to Winnersh, which is just outside Reading. So we've got offices in all sorts of places. We've been going to them. We've been working with delivery teams directly. We've been having workshops and making sure that they feel like we've got their backs. Basically, if don't feel stuck. Accessibility can feel overwhelming, but we're with you. But we've also been doing empathy labs. I'm talking to Hannah's point about the sort of outreach. We've been setting up empathy labs. We've got visual impairment simulator goggles. We've got motor impairment simulator gloves. We've got all sorts of things, tasks, software set up on our laptops. So basically giving people the tiniest of insight into the barriers that disabled people face when they use the digital products that we design and we ship. So that's been really a really amazing in terms of getting people that insight gives people a kind of an eye opener, like, wow, really are we, and we've been causing these problems, and it gets people thinking about how they can avoid causing problems or fix the problems that they know exist. It gives people just a general, as well as that kind of general insight into disability and kind of the experience of life from another person's perspective, because we do tend to think about the world from our own point of view, so it's kind of thinking beyond that. But yeah, we do all sorts of stuff, super varied, from the kind of individual kind of sessions with designers, developers, project owners, to the kind of more kind of community driven things, empathy labs and all that.
Yeah, it's almost like three different strands there, from that the support to the teams, and there's like the strategic side, and then the cultural side as well, which is nice. I know we mentioned there about like challenges. I guess everyone has challenges day to day. What are the things that where you have to work that little bit harder, or maybe a bit of a challenge for the teams?
My major problem is that I forget that, as Martin said earlier, we live and breathe accessibility at work, and it's sometimes like really easy for us to forget that not everyone is able to do that, and not everyone is able to prioritize accessibility in the way that we do, and that they have to balance lots of different projects and lots of different outcomes at the same time. So one of my major challenges is that sometimes I need to take a step back and look at it from like, okay, there's obviously lots going on that I'm not aware of, and I can't get frustrated with things not moving as quickly as I would want them to move, or feeling like I'm having to give the same advice again and again. But that's only because there's other priorities that people kind of have to bear in mind as well, that I don't have to bear in mind. So I think for me, it's like one of the big challenges is like frustration of getting buy-in and making sure that I can balance giving advice and helping people and supporting teams with knowing that, they've got other outcomes they need to deliver on, and they can't always just focus on accessibility as much as, we would love them to be able to.
I guess we're in that position as well at the moment where we're fixing things that are, I was going to say broken. It's not necessary. I mean, yes, they are broken, but it's not been some stuff that we've left broken. It's just knowledge gaps that we're filling now. So we're in that kind of period where we're going back and fixing everything that needs to be fixed. So yeah, that does compete with product priorities and all that kind of thing at the moment, where once we've kind of reached a reasonable baseline across every product, at that point you can start to kind of make things like it's part of your working process. Your accessibility is just always in there, where at the moment it's that kind of like, yeah, messy middle period, as we're kind of putting things right. So we're getting there.
Yeah.
But it is that, yeah, it's the kind of checking your kind of frustrations and making sure that you're on, putting yourself in the product not just putting yourself in the disabled person's shoes, but putting yourself in the product owner's shoes, and making sure that you understand that, yeah, it's not the be all and end all for them, even though it maybe should be, but it's it's that kind of messy part.
Yeah. I guess just touching on, you've mentioned around the cultural side of accessibility, like some of the stuff that you've been doing from like traveling to other locations and the empathy labs. And I know you ran Global Accessibility Awareness Day. You did a day of talks, or in the Newcastle office here actually. So how important do you think that is to drive that kind of accessibility first culture alongside kind of the day to day of making products accessible, but then also trying to drive that awareness culturally across the business?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And then that goes back to the piece on the accessibility champions, and just engagement. And what you'll find is that people, when the penny drops, it's like it's quite a powerful moment where people are, you almost don't need to do very much work other than just keep feeding. It's like people have that appetite for accessibility when they realize that it can answer a whole bunch of questions that you might be asking yourself as a designer. You might be thinking of maybe one of 3 different routes to go down with a design. Maybe accessibility gives you the constraints that you're like, well, option B and C don't work, so A has to be the route. So you save yourself a lot of work. Whether the markup you're writing as a developer is correct or not, usually accessibility answers the question as to whether it should be a section or a div, for example. So yeah, there's a whole load of things that kind of come with that little bit of knowledge of accessibility. So I think the cultural piece is really important, because it gets people thinking and gets people engaged, and allows people to kind of self-serve and help one another as well. We've found that as people get more engaged, whether it's champions, whether it's just people that are generally part of the community, but if there's a question asked, sometimes they can answer it amongst themselves without having to have an accessibility specialist like Hannah or I come in and help out. So it's good to see, and well, great to see, and hopefully something we can keep.
Yeah, you do a great job. I mean, I love getting involved in the sessions that you put on in the guilds, and you always try to put a spin in it to make it kind of fun and engaging and welcome as well. So you're doing an awesome job. I guess then, just to kind of finalize, like looking at kind of future focus there. So we've heard a lot about the impact the team's making, how are you driving the culture forwards? But I guess the question may be like, what's next for the team? So I guess reflecting back to look forward, what are you kind of most proud of looking forward, and what are kind of your goals looking ahead as an accessibility team and a champions network?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess the growth, it's been great to see over the sort of 4 years or so of coming in as the first specialist. Nobody really knew or cared very much, because they didn't know about accessibility, and nobody really understood why they were doing things, or they should do things in an accessible way. and it's been great to see the engagement grow again. Whether it's champions, whether it's just generally people starting to kind of weave it into their day to day, asking questions of each other. Is this accessible, or how will this work for a screen reader user or a keyboard only user? It's been amazing to see the engagement, and strangely and slightly perversely, as with all the number of products that Sage has, new products do pop up every now and then. You're like, there's a new one. I didn't, we need to talk. And then you talk to them and you have that kind of conversation, the initial conversation at the start, you feel the resistance. And then you can watch their progress as you engage more with them, and the penny starts to drop, and you can kind of relive that that experience over and over again, and just see the progress and the enthusiasm grow within those teams. I think that's kind of the most exciting part of it for me, I think.
Yeah. I guess if there's people watching this episode, and there's kind of maybe one thing they can do tomorrow to advocate for accessibility, or to change the way they work, what would you kind of suggest they do?
I would say just get involved if you're interested, get involved in accessibility communities. There's some great communities on LinkedIn, on lots of different social networks. There's some great bloggers out there. Go and read lots of different articles, kind of try and wrap it into your job as much as possible. Try and give it some thought in your design processes or development processes or testing processes, whatever you might have. If you have an interest in accessibility, like, try and learn it and build it into your job. And it will, it will be a little bit difficult at first, but it's definitely something that, it's nice to hear it as part of every sentence and every kind of conversation we now have at Sage, is people going, oh, have we thought about this from an accessibility angle? And that's across all job functions. So I think it's kind of from our engagement, but if you don't have specialists within a company that you work for, or you can't contact any specialists, getting involved in the communities and kind of reading blog posts and things like that, and just trying to work it into your job role are probably some of the best ways that you can get involved with accessibility, in my opinion.
Do you use that as a success metric? How many times accessibility is mentioned in a meeting?
It's
or a
always
drinking
nice.
game.
Yeah.
Not within work hours, of course.
I think you mentioned before about like working just on the keyboard for the day, or is there things like that you can just do to get that empathy?
Yeah. I guess just an exercise that anybody can try. More or less anyone can try. If you hide your mouse in a drawer, and we've got trackpads on our laptops. Yeah. It's the only cheat. It's right next to your keyboard, but try your best not to use it. Just do your day-to-day job. Answer some emails. Add an event to your calendar. I'm not asking you to do design work, you could probably get away with development work, but yeah, hide your mouse in a drawer, 15-20 minutes, and just see how you get on. And I bet you hit some barriers. I bet you think, how does that work? And even if you don't, the nice part of it is you'll kind of be a little bit more used to thinking about the world from another point of view. Keyboard only use is super common. Some people use a hybrid of keyboard and mouse, not necessarily from an accessibility perspective, but some people don't have the choice, and the keyboard is all they can use. So it gives you that insight, shows you some of the barriers that there are there, and also might give you an extra way of getting around. You break your wrists, the mouse might not be as accessible as it used to be, so you might be already in good shape. So yeah, just to try and use the keyboard on its own for 15-20 minutes and see how you manage. I should mention as well, it's very easy. Use the tab key, enter key, arrow keys, and that's probably all you need. And space key, and you're in good shape. So there are only a handful of things to use, to get used to, rather.
Well, that's been super insightful. That brings us to the end of the final episode of this mini-series in Newcastle. So huge thank you to Martin and Hannah for joining us today, and from our other guests as well from UX and research. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. So wherever you're watching this, please share any feedback in the comments. Hopefully we'll be back for more coffee chats in the new year. But until then, thanks for listening, and bye for now.